Hello and welcome back to Mining Stock Daily with me, Paul Harris. Today we're talking about copper exploration and development in Chile in South America, and I've great pleasure to be joined by Christian Easterday, Managing Director and CEO of Hot Chili. Good morning, Christian. It's good evening for you. You're in Australia.
Yes, I am, Paul. Great to speak with you again.
Likewise, it's been quite a while since we've last spoken, and it looks like there's a lot to get up to date on. Now, Hot Chili, you've got the Costa Fuego project, copper gold project in Chile, which comprises the Productora and Cortadera deposits. It's one of the largest copper deposits not held by a major company in the world. That's correct, yeah?
Yeah, correct. I think S&P rates it as a top 10 undeveloped copper project, and yeah, certainly this year it's really well and truly grown into its shoes, and we have about 927 million tons that we announced in the global resource space in the earlier part of this year.
Okay, and this year you sort of combined both of those deposits, Productora and Cortadera, into one project, which you call Costa Fuego, and you put out a combined resource for that, as you said, 927 million tons. You're currently working on a combined pre-feasibility study, which is due out in the first quarter of next year. But before we get to that, as we're at the end of 2022, let's go over some of the highlights of this year, what some of the main achievements were at the project.
Yeah, I guess, look, really kicking off the year, we opened with our TSXV dual listing and started trading on the V, and was well supported with a large capital raising at the beginning of this year that has largely funded quite a lot of drilling on the development front and quite a number of exploration campaigns throughout our land holdings. At the end of the first quarter, we announced that resource upgrade I was discussing. We put a significant amount of material into the indicated basket. So I think we're sitting with about 82% in the measured and in indicated classification, and about 18% of the resource space is held within inferred. So we did a lot of work that was about preparing the resource to be included into a very large combined mining reserve. What we've been doing is progressing a pre-feasibility study to combine both the deposits and employ a central processing approach to utilize all of the more than decade of permitting advance and all of the environmental work and all of the infrastructure advantage that the company has down on the coastline at the original Productora project, where we had already previously completed a pre-feasibility. So I guess a lot of work was done this year to upscale the project towards a study scale, which is approximately 100,000 tons per annum of copper production. Most of the copper production is copper in concentrate, but we'll also have a small amount of cathode production out of the project from the oxide aspect. But the project at the moment is being studied for a 100,000 ton per annum copper project over a 20 to 30 year mine life, and some 50 to 70,000 ounces of annual gold production that will come with that. Some silver, also a molybdenum concentrate will be produced out of the project. But I guess where that has positioned us is, holding really, I guess, the only senior copper development that sits down at low altitude, with probably what we've been really looking at over the last 3 months is probably one of the fastest timeframes to production out of all the senior projects, including names such as SolGold, Philo, Solaris, Los Andes. This project at the moment, following the pivot in our development studies, which has just recently been announced, has Costa Fuego potentially coming into production at that scale in 2028.
Excellent. Thank you, Christian. You recently put out, you mentioned your low elevation. You're in Chile, so you're going to be using sort of seawater or desalinated seawater. And you recently took another step forward in that, as you announced that you had a maritime concession, but you've now actually been delivered or been given access to the land as well by Chile's Navy or Maritime Authority.
Yeah, correct. And look, when you talk about permitting, this is really one of the key aspects that contributes to that 20-year average timeframe to bring a new large-scale copper deposit from exploration, discovery through to production. A lot of that is associated with getting your water extraction rights. And in the case of Hot Chili, we started on this 10 years ago. So 2 years ago, we were given our maritime concession for the extraction of seawater for the use of the combined large-scale project. And it's taken another 2 years for the Naval Authority of Chile to grant us access to the physical land where that pumping and sequestration station is going to be located on the coastline. Really, all of these advances we've made are all the hurdles that stand in front of timely production for these big new copper supplies for the world. And what we have now is we have easement corridors to establish seawater pipelines, easement corridors to establish high voltage power straight from the main station or main central node of the central grid to the project, having all of the surface rights, maritime concession now, the physical land for the maritime concession, as well as earlier in the year, we were able to secure, after almost 6 years of application, a direct connection to that substation of the central grid for the project. So these are not things that the government hand out lightly. They're very long lead time items. And it now leaves really one final infrastructure piece for Costa Fuego to be secured, and that is a port negotiation with the existing third-party port of Las Lozas, which sits 50 kilometers from where that central processing facility is going to be constructed. So not only will Hot Chili have all of the permits in place and accesses to establish infrastructure, but it looks likely that we'll be looking to partner with that port for a bulk loading option that is tied into the life of this project. So all very important de-risking aspects when you're in the development stage. And so yeah, those are some of the key things that we've been working on this year, Paul.
Thank you, Christian. Let's talk a little bit more about government. Chile got a new government at the start of this year with Gabriel Boric. He was elected on a sort of a left-leaning, greater social equality sort of platform. But at mid-year, the Chile's process to put in place a new constitution, voters rejected the draft constitution. There was a lot of things that were, let's say, challenging for mining, particularly regarding environmental aspects there. So what's your feel for what the environment is, the political environment is for new mining developments in Chile at the moment?
Look, I think there was a concerted sigh of relief from the industry, firstly. I think there's a few things that really differentiated Chile in that process. Firstly, that they had that national dialogue, that they addressed the concerns being expressed before the pandemic and around social inequality. And went through a fairly thorough, almost 2-year constitutional process and taxation discussion in terms of Chile's national take with relation to their natural resource sector. And outside of all of the clickbait media that came out of Bloomberg and Reuters and, super profit taxes being discussed just as they were discussed in Australia before being rejected, we went through this fairly sort of interesting period in Chile's political landscape with Boric coming on. I will note that Boric is from a long line of left presidents that have been in charge of Chile for almost 45 years. So that was not a surprise to us. Another president from the left, perhaps a little further left than previous presidents. However, the one thing that really differentiated Chile, in my opinion, was embedded in their constitution. For any constitutional change and for any taxation change, something that Australia, the UK, Canada, the US don't have, which is the requirement for a 2/3 majority when you're discussing constitutional and taxation change. And it was that key aspect that allowed a very mature conversation to occur and ultimately for radical ideas that have been proposed by the People's Constitutional Assembly for ultimately to be wholeheartedly rejected and rejected by a popular vote in every state of Chile. So it had a galvanizing effect that that the conversation happened, that things such as ceasing tomato production in Chile because it was too water intensive, removing water rights from the mining industry and the agricultural sector, all of these things which were quite radical and probably very dangerous to Chile's #1 standing economically in LATAM, were put to a vote and were democratically soundly defeated. And that really delivered Boric probably an important message early in his presidency, one that was, it looks like, taken on board very quickly, and to see the pro-Chile investment policies that were rolled out within weeks of that constitutional defeat, and then to see the third incarnation of taxation discussion, taking into consideration that the previous taxation discussions had never even made it to the Senate or been put to a vote because they could not secure 2/3 majority, that now we're dealing with a very moderated, very sensible taxation bill that seeks to balance the foreign investment coming into Chile into sectors such as copper and lithium, and maintain their very strong position in the global resource industry as a giant. So I imagine that people from myself to explorers to the world's largest mining companies have been very pleased with what has happened in Chile, and it's probably actually once again acted as a leader in LATAM in these matters. So so very, very positive on that card for 2022.
Well, thank you, Christian. It's something I've been following closely, so it's always good to hear it expressed by somebody that's actually active on the ground. Now, let's use that as a springboard to talk about 2023. Obviously, the key thing coming up is the pre-feasibility study for Costa Fuego. Are there any sort of bits you're sort of redoing or adjusting because of those sort of pro-Chile investment plans that you mentioned? The government's created some sort of additional incentives. Let's express it that way. So other things to perhaps incorporate into your calculations and your designs.
Well, look. Firstly, Paul, and this was embedded in those recent announcements about 10 days ago. We've actually just announced a pivot towards a growth phase owing to that next step in consolidation at Cordillera. So we had a deposit that we'd been very careful not to show the tenement boundaries on. Cordillera porphyry discoveries grown from nothing to 600 million tonnes in short order over 2.5 years, and unfortunately we did not control the western extent of the deposit. It was controlled by Antofagasta Minerals, as well as some private leaseholders that we'd been negotiating and discussing with over the past 2.5 years. And we've been able to successfully complete a very low cost transaction with Antofagasta Minerals to acquire those leases, giving us access to a fourth porphyry and a cluster of porphyry targets, which we're very keen to get drilling on. And I guess when we completed a strategic review about 3 months ago, and we were looking at these acquisitions coming in and completing those transactions, we were very aware that Hot Chili and Costa Fuego, because of all of the permitting advance, we were almost in a race against ourselves. We were the only 100,000 tonne plus project coming in 27. Everyone else was 28 out through to 2035, out of the list of 6 or 7 or 8 names which you would know well. And so in being able to secure the rest of Cordillera, it's given us time to be able to drill out a much larger porphyry cluster, which will have drill rigs commencing on at the very beginning of next year. And we're taking a period to pause, pull in those additional resources and expand our resource upgrade. So next year, really the key catalyst for us will be delivering a preliminary economic assessment and a scoping study on where the project was being studied at, which was 20 million tonne per annum sulfide operation, producing around about 100,000 tonnes of copper production per annum. Now we've got the ability to perhaps see some material resource growth coming into our books that has given us pause to probably be a bit more ambitious. We well know at the economics of the deposit. We've been from pre-feasibility level at Productora in 2016 to all the work we've done to the upscaled project. But now we believe there's an opportunity to upscale Costa Fuego again towards a project more in the size range where Jose Maria is, probably approaching 150,000 tonnes of annual copper production, and looking to potentially move that scale from 20 million tonne per annum processing to 30 million tonnes per annum processing. And what that really does for Hot Chili is a couple of things. We're already positioned extremely well on capital intensity. We've got a project that is going to cost around about 1.2 billion, 1.3 billion to build. If this was up next to Filo or Jose Maria or Waritza or SolGold, you know, this would be a $2.5 billion, $3 billion project. So that's something we already had an advantage on. The challenge for us has been to get the cash costs of the future operation and try to push those into the first quartile. And through all the work that we've been doing, reducing the strip ratios, building out the bulk resource, we now see an opportunity to lift that scale to a scale that allows the cash cost to push towards the first quartile also. So next year is going to be an exciting period of growth, particularly the first 6 months. In that first half, we'll be delivering the preliminary economic assessment on what we've studied so far, but certainly looking to show a pathway to scale that up 50%, as I've just discussed. In the second half of next year, the resource upgrade will come off the back of the preliminary economic assessment, and then we'll be looking to deliver the combined pre-feasibility at either the 20 million tonne per annum scale, or we're crossing our fingers that we can push this over the line and move this to the 30 million tonne per annum scale and deliver that in really the early parts of 2024. So all that being said, what this does is shift our potential production timeline to 2028, about the same time frame that Jose Maria had for its first production before it was taken over by Lundin. So we imagine that they're probably around that timing.
Okay, thank you, Christian. As you say, that's a very exciting pivot, being able to go to 30 million tonnes a year and 150,000 tonnes per year of copper production. Now, as you said, you could be drilling more drilling early next year. That takes money, of course. What's the company's current cash position? Will you have to raise more money in order to complete these goals?
Sure, it's it's like one of those perennial questions until you go into production eventually, right? So unfortunately, these are very capital intensive projects and time intensive projects, and anyone without the heart to see through a couple of decades building one of these things probably should go into a different commodity space or commodity class. But I think that our cash, we finished at in the last quarter with about 15.4. I imagine
that's
we'll be
Australian, yeah,
Australian dollars,
yeah.
So similar to Canadian, yes. So yeah, no, we're fully financed into late 2023. Able to finance a 10,000 metre drilling program and also complete all of our minimum work programs towards that PEA and that resource upgrade. So we're certainly capable of kicking things off. However, if we're hoping for quite a lot of success, particularly since the new ground has got drill confirmed success on it, that we're able to see that success early and no doubt plan to finance next year. So on that score, we've been working with our advisors and developing a number of conversations with a number of interested parties, but not one of the or one part of that grouping is certainly discussions going with the streaming and royalty businesses of North America. Obviously, Costa Fuego and what Hot Chili has is a very conventional, large-scale copper project but we're also blessed with all of the things that the streamers like in the precious metal space. So significant annual gold production, significant silver production, and also molybdenum streams, which will probably not be of interest to the royalty houses. But what that means is that the type of financing and de-risking financing or non-dilutive funding options are available to Hot Chili, and we're certainly progressing those discussions. And we hope to be in a good position in the first half of next year with a number of those discussions, and whether that's something that we may entertain. It's certainly high on our agenda to investigate further. But certainly, I guess we have a very strong supportive shareholder in Glencore that supported the TSXV listing following their significant investment in August of last year. Obviously, following on with a very unique offtake arrangement that we did with Glencore, probably something that hasn't been done with another junior in Glencore before. Negotiating just at benchmark terms only on 60% of our production, but just on the first 8 years. It means that we were just over it in London with LME Week, and having a lot of fruitful discussions with off-takers and traders in the space. So certainly that the ability for Hot Chili to still have a lot of its offtake on the table is encouraging for us. And also, I guess, the other unique aspect of the deal with Glencore was the fact that they hold a board member and they hold those offtake rights while they hold a minimum of 7.5% in the company. So, it's always good to have a lead order in any funding situation you're going into. But certainly, I think that we're very fortunate to be finishing the year with good cash, which means that we have a bit of flexibility, and we certainly will fund at a timing that we feel is appropriate, and perhaps once we get a few catalysts out of the way.
Thank you, Christian. Now, final question here, but I think it's a very pertinent one, given that we've been talking about financing. Well, when you sort of look at the company, its market cap compared to some of the other companies you've mentioned that are at a similar stage in Latin America, I think it's fair to say that your valuation lags some of the other companies. Even though, as you mentioned, you're perhaps the more advanced of the projects, and you've got the scale, of course. What is it you think the market doesn't understand yet, or perhaps doesn't believe?
Yeah, no, Paul, I think I just continue to get this question. And, we had a meeting with a fund today that sat there and said, look, we just have to come and talk to you because, we've gone through the interviews, we've gone through what you have. You have a resource that is better grade than the senior copper developers. It's the only one sub 1,000 meters on the coastline of Chile. It's not at 4,700 meters. It doesn't have 4 or 5 year build times, and it doesn't have an extra $1 billion on the capex just to establish. Your resource is a higher component of measured and indicated than any of your peers, and you're also the only one that can bring it into production in that time frame. So you'd have to ask, what the hell is wrong? We have been sort of systematically going through the company and de-risking it, getting a significant investor in Glencore to support us and complete the due diligence on Hot Chili over and above any other senior copper developer. And you kind of get to the end of the line, Paul, and you've gone through your entire tick list of what could possibly be wrong, and then you're still scratching your head. So, I would probably be the most frustrated CEO in the industry, but for the fact that nearly every CEO thinks that they're undervalued. I think in this case, when we've spent $220 million in the ground and you've got 120 mil market cap, I can confidently say that our investors are getting their stake in the company for 50 cents in the dollar spent. But probably when you look at the Philos and the Solarises and the SolGolds and the Los Andes and even the Marimacas, Marimaca's not a senior copper developer. It's going to be a 37,000 ton per annum play, very well located, very well advanced, actually. I like the project, but sporting a valuation of close to 400 million Canadian. So, I would probably leave that in the basket that if you found an opportunity like that, then you probably need to look into it closer. And you probably need to look at history at the other large-scale Australian copper developers, in particular, the last large-scale copper developer the ASX had, which was Equinox Resources, a guy by the name of Craig Williams, that not many people have heard of, while he was based in Australia, successfully dual listed into the TSX, spent some time getting the liquidity right, and then allowing the TSX to drive the market cap of Equinox. And that was a $45 million company that funded a $1.6 billion mine and was taken over 9 months later for $8 billion. So, you know, every once in a while, when you think you can't understand why a market cap is out of value, you just need to return to fundamentals. Our time will come. Craig's time came. And what better a reminder in the market to know what a 120,000 tonne per annum copper production base looks like in a takeover. $8 billion 10 years ago with Equinox, $9.4 billion for Oz Minerals today. So, you know, at 120 mil market cap, we've got everything to play for. And at the moment, we're in a leg race against everybody else. We just happen to be out in front. And we're very confident of the asset that we're building. But, you know, I think it's a really good question you ask, and it's a question I get in almost every meeting.
Well, I imagine as part of the answer to that, you're going to be spending, now that travel's easing up, you're going to be spending more time on a plane to London, to Canada, and all the other sort of key investment centers to sort of generate interest for the company. Lots to do next year. Hot Chili trades on the ASX and the TSXV under HCH, and on the OTCQX under HHLKF. Managing Director Christian Easterday, thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
And that's all from me, Paul Harris. Stay tuned for more from Mining Stock Daily.